What is up, guys? It is Quinn here, and today we're going to be doing a player versus player comparison. And this one's actually a pretty interesting one because it's going to be two wide receivers from the same team. So, not just two random wide receivers going like back to back. These guys are both on the same team, Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. I feel like it's pretty rare where you see two wide receivers, going as like borderline wide receiver ones, and they're just back to back. Because typically we have a pretty good idea, who's going to be the alpha, who's the 1A, who's the 1B. Some recent examples I can think of, I think last year Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were going pretty close together. Even maybe a duo like Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, but that kind of points out the importance of hitting on the right guy here. I was in on Robert Woods. That was the wrong call. Obviously, we saw Robert Woods was like a back-end wide receiver 2. Cooper Kupp was an absolute league winner. So we want to locate the better option of these two players. So I'm going to go through their current ADP, their 2020 season, their 2021 season, what I'm expecting out of them in 2022, and then I'll talk about which player I would take at their current ADP. I want to know what you guys think. So either before or after you watch the video, let me know who you guys would be taking, Keenan Allen or Mike Williams. Drop it down below in the comment section, and I'll make sure to get back to every person. But starting off with their current ADP, this is using Underdog Fantasy Football. So Keenan Allen is the wide receiver 12, going in the early third round. And then Mike Williams is the wide receiver 13, so back to back. And he's going like early to mid round 3. Mike Williams' ADP has definitely been on the rise as of late. And now jumping into their 2020 season, let's start it off with Keenan Allen here. He was the wide receiver 11 in half-point PPR scoring. Remember, this was Justin Herbert's rookie year. We didn't really know what to expect out of Keenan Allen heading into this season because Tyrod Taylor was lined up to be the starter. We obviously didn't know that Justin Herbert would be the absolute stud he was basically from the first time he stepped on the field. And so wide receiver 11, very, very solid finish. But if you take away the week 1 game where we had Tyrod Taylor as the starter, Herbert took over in week 2, and then he was injured in week 15 but still kind of played. If you take away those 2 weeks, subtract those games from his points, he actually would be the wide receiver 5 in points per game. He was his typical like target funnel self. He was 3rd in target rate, 5th in targets, 5th in target share, and 5th in receptions. So a very typical Keenan Allen season in 2020. For Mike Williams, not even close to Keenan Allen's production. He was the wide receiver 56 in half-point PPR. This was his 4th NFL season, and he actually regressed from the 2019 season. He saw a very similar volume, but his efficiency really fell off. In 2019, he caught 49 passes for 1,001 yards. That is crazy efficient, over 20 yards per reception. Then in 2020, catches 48 passes, but only turns that into 756 receiving yards. He did finish close in points per game, just because those touchdown numbers kind of balanced. But he was definitely not someone who was super fantasy relevant on a week-to-week basis and not someone you could trust in your lineup. And just looking at his usage, it was very similar to how he was utilized, through his first 3 years. He was a downfield threat. He was 9th in average depth of target, and then he was 12th in deep targets. So he was a big play guy, but really not, getting enough volume to be a consistent, reliable option. Now moving over to 2021, for Keenan Allen, this was the same Keenan Allen, wide receiver 14 and half-point PPR points per game, 8th in targets, 2nd in routes run, 6th in receptions, did get a little bit unlucky in the touchdown department, only got into the end zone 6 times on a high-volume passing attack, and he was actually 5th in red zone targets, so 6 touchdowns, 5th in red zone targets, does not really match up, and you may say, maybe he didn't convert in the red zone, wasn't super reliable. He caught 17 of his 25 red zone targets, so I guess he was getting it, at the 5, at the 2, at the 3. He just was not getting into the end zone. So maybe that flips here in 2022, but we'll see. The big difference here in the 2021 season was Mike Williams. This was definitely his breakout season. So in his first 4 years, he had never been targeted over 90 times, and he had never caught 50 passes in a season. That all changed here in 2021. He was targeted 129 times and caught 76 of them. So under new head coach Brandon Staley, his usage was totally different. He was no longer just a deep threat. I mentioned in the 2020 season how he had similar usage to the rest of his career. So if we look back, 2018, his ADOT was 15.4. 2019, it was 17.4. 2020, 14.8. So those are all very, very high average depth of target. Here in 2021, fell all the way down to 10.7. He was 14th in targets. Never seen that kind of volume before, but he still was a deep threat, 12th in deep targets. He was getting important, opportunities on the red zone, 8th in red zone targets. I will say his production was kind of carried by his first 5 weeks. If you guys remember, he was on an absolute tear through 5 games. He was on pace to finish as a high-end wide receiver 1 through those 5. So in those first 5 games, he was averaging 10.2 targets per game. He scored 6 touchdowns, and then he went for 80-plus yards in 4 of those 5 games. Over the last 11, definitely saw the production fall off. He only saw double-digit targets once, so that's a big fall off from averaging double-digit targets through 5 games to only seeing it one time. Last 11 games, only scored 3 touchdowns compared to his 6 through 5, and then he only cracked 80 yards 3 times. So I'm not discrediting him, saying it was a fluky start, because the points count. I feel like it's very stupid when people are like, oh, look, over the last 3 weeks, he's done this. If there's not a massive change in his usage, then I feel like it's kind of a lazy argument. You got to look at the whole picture here, but it is just something to point out because, he kind of came out of nowhere, then did start to slow down as the season went on. He was definitely still playable, but he didn't have that elite season I think we were kind of expecting after those first 5 weeks. Now, looking at 2022 for Keenan Allen, I feel like he's pretty easy to project. The last 5 years in half-point PPR, he's averaged between 12.8 and 14.6. In PPR scoring, he's averaged between 16.1 and 17.8. I'd be expecting somewhere in that range. He has never been a big touchdown guy. 8 is the most he's had in a single season. But it feels possible that he can break into the double digits here. It's tough because we haven't seen it. But this is going to be an offense with a lot of passing touchdowns, and this would be Keenan Allen's path to a high-end wide receiver 1 finish if he can keep that same volume. But he just gets a little bit lucky with touchdowns. I'm talking like 10, 11, 12. That could easily be a top 5 season, especially in PPR formats. He is getting up there a little bit in age at 30 years old, but we really haven't seen any regression in his play, so I'm not really going to be expecting it here in his age 30 season. Maybe next year, year after, we're starting to get a little concerned, but I definitely think we can still squeeze like a solid wide receiver 1 season out of him here this year. And then for Mike Williams, he's definitely the more kind of interesting player to project because Keenan Allen, we know who he is. For Mike Williams, I think he's going to play the same role he did last year. I don't see a reason for them to kind of revert back to what he was early in his career, especially when he really thrived in this new spot. He'll be the wide receiver 2 likely on a high-powered passing attack led by Justin Herbert. So I'd be expecting similar season numbers to the 2021 season. Hopefully he can kind of balance out that projection, but he may just be like a boom or bust type of play, which isn't terrible. I think people are scared off by that a little bit too much, but he definitely appears to be the far less safe option compared to Keenan Allen, where you know exactly what you're going to get from him. So now if I would have to choose between Keenan Allen or Mike Williams early round 3, I'm pretty firmly taking Keenan Allen in half-point PPR and PPR formats. You could take a swing on Mike Williams in terms of standard scoring just because Keenan Allen doesn't get benefited by that volume there. But for me, I feel like Keenan Allen's floor in half-point and full-point PPR is a high-end wide receiver 2. It's tough to find that floor when you're drafting someone like at wide receiver 12 because you're basically drafting them as like a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. And I feel like Keenan Allen's ceiling this year can be a high-end wide receiver 1. So I feel like he's a low-risk, pretty high-reward type of player. I do think, Mike Williams can put together a massive ceiling, but I do think there's some risk in spending third-round draft capital here. He's a player who really has one super productive fantasy season in 5 years. I'm not saying it was a fluke, because as I talked about, the usage was different, but it's just something to be, a little weary of. I don't think he's like an 100% lock to repeat or improve on his 2021 season. So just something to keep in mind there. I still like Mike Williams. I think he's like a mid to high end wide receiver 2. But for me, I just have Keenan Allen locked into my top 12 wide receivers. I don't think he's going to fall out of there. So I will be going with Keenan Allen. But I want to know what you guys think. Keenan Allen or Mike Williams. Let me know down below. I'm guessing most people are going to be favoring Keenan Allen here, but who knows? May have some Mike Williams truthers out there. I do like both of these players for fantasy, but I got to go with Keenan Allen. In my next two videos, I'm going to be talking about some rookie running backs and wide receivers. So over the next 2 days, I'll go through running backs, then wide receivers, talking about their current redraft ADP, whether or not I would buy or sell them at their current price. So if you're interested, stay tuned for that. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. As always, thank you guys so much for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.